everybody, it's Miss Julia here. So I started a video and I thought I'm going to let it dry. So I thought I would do a quick little introduction on what today's video is going to be. So the video today is on strawberries. We're doing a salt background and it's kind of a fun, loose piece. I'm just going to wait for this first half to dry and then I'll show you the detail, but enjoy the video. So today we're going to do a bunch of strawberries. I thought it'd be kind of fun. It's colorful, it's a kind of a whimsical picture, and it gives us the opportunity to have some fun with the background. So I'm going to start with the center of my picture, put a tiny little dot. Then I want you on either side of that dot to draw a strawberry. Now a strawberry looks a little bit like a heart, so you're going to come around like this, little rounded end, and then right in the center here you're just going to overlap with the bump of the strawberry. So I'm going to put another one right next to it. Start off with the hips of the strawberry, a little bit like a heart, and then you put that center, and then I'm going to put another one a little more leaning in towards the one in the center, because you want your eye to move around the page and you want your focal point to be kind of this strawberry that's pointing towards your third of the picture. And there we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and add the spikes to the top of the strawberries. Draw the spikes. Alright, now I'm going to take and do a stem coming from the center of this one, and I'm just going to loop it around till it kind of disappears behind this guy. This one, I'm going to have a stem coming out of him, almost connecting with that stem. This one here, I'm not going to put a stem on. I think what I'm going to do is start back in here behind this strawberry with a line and a curve and create a leaf. So I'm just going to show the side of a leaf. Okay, maybe a little curl on the end. I'm going to double this line so it looks a little thicker. Then up here, I'm going to create another leaf bending down the other side. Exaggerate your curls. It's a little bit of a whimsical picture. It's not meant to be high realism. And I'm going to now come from there and I'm going to fit a little stem kind of going into this other strawberry. Then from there I'm going to add the little vines. I'm just going to put a couple little whimsical vines coming from there. Now to balance our picture, we kind of want to look from this third down to this third. So I'm going to dangle another leaf. I'm going to dangle another leaf. This, and then from there I'm going to add another little curl of a vine, double the vine, and then I'm going to add a bit of a curl, but on this one I'm going to add a little tiny bud. So it's a tiny little sprouting strawberry. So I think I went a little crazy on the length of this leaf, so I'm just going to take this back a little bit. They have a little, the leaf looks almost like, you know, ivy. It's got the bit of a look of a vine leaf. Okay, now on these ones I'm going to just thicken up the line a little bit. They're kind of a thin little dangly stems, so they're not quite as thick as the ones going to the strawberries. Okay, now what we're going to do is, because we don't have any masking fluid, some people do, you can mask your strawberries and do your background, but in order to keep them clean, we're just going to leave them dry. So I'm going to take a little water and I'm going to level out my painting board. So I'm going to lift up the painting board, I'm going to put something underneath. I'm using a roll of duct tape, nothing fancy. I'm just lifting up my board so it's level so that my wash doesn't run downhill. So I'm going to go like this, and I'm just going to go right through those vines. I'm not worried about stems, but I'm going to kind of go around my leaf. Try to keep it as dry as you can. It's not meant to be neat. You know, you don't have to sit there and go like this. You know, it's water. Just get it in there, slap it on, have some fun with it. I'm not going to worry too much about this little guy down here. I'm going to just go right over top of him. So I'm really keeping the strawberries clean in the main leaves. Just slapping that water on. Nice even shine. And you don't want puddles, so you got to move that water around so it doesn't form any puddles. So you see how it's puddling right here? I want to move that around because the puddles actually suck up your paint, and you end up getting more paint in those spots, and then you end up with a bloom as it starts to dry. You'll get a bloom. So if you move your water around for, put your water on for a good minute. Take the time to just keep moving it around so it doesn't develop any low spots. Go. And I'm just going to cover up that whole area, and you can see where you've been by looking on an angle, and where you've left it dry it should look matte in those spots, so no shine in the spots. So I want to have a good amount of wetness. Now I'm going to do a vignetted background, which means I'm not painting the edges. I'm starting with burnt sienna, and I'm just going to put the burnt sienna in close to my strawberries. And I'm using a wash brush because I can turn my brush sideways and go in nice and thin to areas I want to get into the spaces, but I can flatten it out and keep my brush moving so it doesn't dry while I'm doing this. You do have to move kind of quick. You don't want this water to dry. So no pressure. It's just meant to be fun, but it is kind of a stressful little spot where you want to just get it in there. Now, I'm not going to coat the entire background. I'm just flipping my brush so that it's random. I'm coming all around my objects, this, and I'm going right up to my leaves. So while I'm putting this on, I'm actually rehydrating my paper because this wash is wet. So I'm going to just soften edges so that as it fades out. So I'm always, if you go to soften an edge, you can dampen your brush, but dry your brush off so you're not putting a puddle of water onto your picture. So about that much, so just kind of loose. Then I'm going to go right into some phthalo blue. And I'm just going to start with phthalo blue on top. Phthalo blue mixed with burnt sienna creates almost a bit of a soft gray. So I'm going to just mix it a little bit into the color, but let the blue stand on its own in some spots. And just let it seek a level and bleed. Okay, if you develop any puddles, so you see that one right in the middle, I'm going to dry my brush off and absorb it up like a little mop. Don't use Kleenex. Kleenex is the kiss of death for, if you're in my classes, you know that Kleenex is just something you do not want to use on a wash because it just kills your wash. It takes the moisture off your page, which really defeats the purpose of that wet on wet, and it causes marks on your paper. So when you go back to put more color in there, you have little rough spots and the color goes on darker in those spots. Okay, so now I've just added this nice little bleed. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to a darker color. I'm going in with Payne's Gray, and I mixed a little blue with the Payne's Gray just because Payne's Gray can be a bit of a jumpy color and it can be almost too dark. And I'm just creating a little hint of shadow underneath this leaf. And I'm taking a damp brush and I'm just kind of feathering it in like this. So I'm just creating a hint of shadow just to kind of show off those strawberries. It's not like they're really sitting on anything, or we're kind of not really, it could be suspended, but it could be hanging on the vine. We're not really making a surface. We're creating this almost an abstract background. But I just want to show it off by putting a little bit of dark underneath. Now I'm going to check for puddles, absorb those puddles up. So right now, as it's starting to dry, you see how it's still glossy, but it's not puddly wet. That's the time you want to put on your salt. Now I'm going to use a salt background on this one. The idea of the salt is to use a pinch. Don't dump it on. Then you have to wiggle it between your fingers. If you don't wiggle it between your fingers, it's going to clump too much in one spot. So you just think of fairy dust. You want to kind of flip it on there. And you can see wherever the salt lands, it absorbs up the paint. So you're going to get what looks almost like a snowflake effect. It's kind of cool. Don't over salt it, but you know, you want to have enough on there that you're going to see the texture. Now, I do find sometimes it helps, depending on the look you want, if you do not touch it at this point. So say you were doing a snow scene, it would look like snowflakes in the sky. But if you wanted to kind of run a little and have a little more movement to it rather than just little pinpointed dots, rinse your brush really good and then just tap off the excess, you know, water. You want water on it, but you don't want to drip on it. So you want to just make sure that your ferrule doesn't have a drip, because you don't want these big blooms. And you just flick your brush and it kind of activates the salt and also creates that bloom effect, but it does kind of do something to the salt where the salt goes a little more crazy. So at this point, you can take a little bit of Kleenex, roll it up almost like a blending stump, and just clean up any little bit that got onto your strawberries. Don't worry so much about the leaves, but just if there's a big bloom or a little bit of overhang onto your strawberry, just kind of clean it off with your Kleenex. Try not to disturb your background. Now, we're going to let this thoroughly dry. I want to let it dry at least a half an hour. So we'll come back in a few minutes and I will show you how to detail this piece. Okay, now that we've let this dry, the first thing you want to do is you want to take and brush off the excess salt. So you can brush it over top of a sink. I'm just brushing it into the bottom of my tray. Now, the background is dried and everybody's going to have a different effect on the background, but it's kind of fun because you really don't know what you're going to get. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little yellow ochre and I'm just going to put it on thin, and I'm going to coat a thin coat. So I'm wetting my strawberry with yellow ochre on my brush. So instead of wetting it twice, because it's a small little section, I don't want to wet it with water and then put yellow on. I'm just going directly on with yellow, but thin enough. I don't want it to look like mustard, and it's yellow ochre, so it can look like mustard if you're not carefully put on too heavy. You want to keep it kind of transparent, show that white of the paper. So I want to be able to touch it and it puddles when I touch it. So I don't want it to be soaked to the point where you have no control of it, but I want it wet enough that I can go right in with the next color and let it bleed. So while this is wet, I'm going to go in with some, so they look a little bit like lemons right now. So I'm going to go in with a little bit of cadmium red light, which is kind of an orangey red. So I'm just going to tap it on the outside edges, and I'm going to work my way in, but I'm working a little more like dots, a little more like a pointillism, where I'm dotting and letting it bleed, but I'm letting some of the yellow show through. And as I work my way towards the center, I'm going to go lighter, lighter, lighter until I let some of that yellow show. Then I'm going to move right while this is still wet. I'm moving on to the next one. And I'm going to keep moving fairly quickly because you don't want the third little strawberry to dry. If you feel like you need more time, just wet one at a time and then you'll have more time. But I like to work quick. So I'm just going to kind of do my outer edges, because strawberries have dimples. They have little seeds on the outside and they look like little dimples, little dots. So I'm just working my way towards those little highlights in the center, letting some of that yellow ochre show. So I want the edges of my strawberry to look quite clean though, so that it doesn't look bumpy. Now I'm going to move in with either an alizarin crimson or a quinacridone rose or a permanent rose, whatever rose you have there. When you put that on top of the orange, it deepens the red. You can use a cadmium red deep if you want, but I find by using more of a pink shade, you get more of that strawberry color. So I'm going to just dot my way in. I'm not really covering the orange. I'm just kind of working my dots next to it. So I want that texture of a strawberry. Okay, move on to the next one. If you find it bleeds too much, you might have used too much water on the second coat, and you might have to wait a few seconds or a minute or two for that first and second coat to dry before you, not to dry, but to get a little bit more matte, so you can go right in with this without having to, you know, lose all your color. And it all blends into one shade of pink. All right, do this one. Now, depending on how ripe you want the strawberry, you could leave one strawberry or two strawberries less vibrant, so they look like they're maybe not quite as ripe. So I'm going to leave this one not as deep as those. Now I'm going to go down to this little guy who's more of a bud, and I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to him, and I'm just going to put a touch of orange just on the very end, and then leave the tip of it a little bit lighter as it ripens up. Okay, now as I want to deepen this a little bit more, I'm going to switch over to my blue mixed with the phthalo that we used as the shadow on our piece, and I'm just going to start dotting in just a few little textures. I don't want it to overpower, but I want to put some of those little dips that you see where, and they're like little swoops that I'm going to put in there. Instead of just a dot, I want that little bit of color to have a bit of a curve to it, so it looks like the texture of a strawberry. So think of how the light would hit this. So the light's going to come from the top here, so I'm not going to put as much up here. And the underside of this one, I'm going to tap a little bit more. And over here, I'm just going to tap a little bit more. So this blue that I'm putting on here is kind of an underpainting. So while I have that still going, I'm going to go, and it's not totally dry, it's just damp. I'm going to go in with a little bit more of the pink, or the rose, and I'm just going to enhance those with a touch of red. And what happens is that because watercolors are transparent, that blue paint is going to mix with the red, which is going to give you almost a bit of a violet look. But it's better than just putting purple on here, because the purple doesn't have as much contrast of different colors than if you mix two different, the blue and the red on the painting, rather than mix a purple and just put it on. It just has a little more life to it. It looks more realistic to the eye. So I'm tapping this in here. Okay, now I'm going to move on to just the top of this little guy. I'm going to move on to my leaves. So for the leaves, what I want you to do is I want you to start off by wetting the leaf with the yellow ochre. And in this case, I would do one leaf at a time, because it's going to take a little more to it to do it. So put one leaf in at a time. While that leaf is wet, go in with the blue and Payne's Gray mixture. And that's going to mix with your yellow ochre, and it's going to turn kind of a bluey green. So I'm just going to kind of go down the spine, leaving a few highlights, the under part of each leaf. And while that's wet, I'm going to take a nail. It sounds really funny, but I have never found a little tool that works as well as a nail. So you just take a galvanized nail so you don't get rust on your picture. And you don't press too hard, and what you're going to do is you're going to kind of jiggle in the veins, and where you've put that blue paint, it's going to kind of flow into the grooves, and you'll see it after a few seconds. But you got to do it while it's wet. If you find it doesn't show up real good, I'm going to take and drop a mixture of the yellow ochre and blue, which turns kind of green. Obviously yellow and blue make green. And I'm going to just drop it in a little more, dragging it down those grooves, and they show up a little more. So that's called scoring. So we've scored, but we've used a nail just so we can get into smaller spaces than if you use the end of a wash brush or a brush that has a palette knife end. So put a few little shadows on there, and I'm just going to do each leaf the same way. And as far as the stem, I'm just going to start off with the yellow on the stem just to wet it. You could do a couple of these little vines as well, just to wet it, maybe 2. While it's still wet, take your blue and Payne's Gray mixture and just let it float into where you've dampened it. So you have little variations of yellow and little shadows, so you can put it only where you want the shadow and let them bleed in between. Use the Payne's Gray and blue mixture with a touch of yellow ochre to give you a deep green, and you're going to put the spikes on your strawberries. This will be your last step. So I'm going to put those spikes, and they're going to be a nice vibrant dark green made with your Payne's Gray, blue, and yellow ochre. So I'm going to finish this up. I will post the finished one on my Facebook and on my website. And enjoy this video and have fun with it.